Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it is an honor to be able to stand once again in this House and participate in an important debate. Now, I plan to address two major themes in my speech. First has to do with something that it seems like the members opposite are simply not aware of what's contained in this bill. And that is that this bill actually reduces some of the penalties for serious firearms offenses. And I'll get into the specifics of that here in a moment. And then two, the larger topic of conversation surrounding being soft on crime and the very, very troubling trends that we see, not only with this bill, Madam Speaker, but with some of the larger context of how this government is failing victims, Madam Speaker. So first, on firearms. Madam Speaker, I find it absolutely tragic that we are debating firearms in this place in a way that completely ignores the facts. Now, you'll have the members opposite talk about how, it's important to ban assault rifles and that these military-style weapons and whatnot, when very few members opposite understand the reality of what they're talking about. When the reality is truly a trifecta of misinformation, political rhetoric, torqued to the highest extent possible to appeal to a narrow band of political interests that is simply not based on reality. A few examples. The conservative member for Markham Unionville brought forward Bill C-238, a bill, Madam Speaker, that was meant to endeavor to bring as many people together to combat a real issue, and that is violent gun crime. Yet, those Liberals voted against it. How tragic is it that the Liberals that claim to be targeting law-abiding firearms owners would absolutely dismiss an attempt by parliamentarians to try and address some of those issues? Absolutely shameful. Second, we see the context of aspects of this debate with what was last year's order in council banning 1,500 firearms there was absolutely absurd logic. In fact, Madam Speaker, when I participated in the Member of Parliament's briefing for that OIC, the officials that were brought in didn't even understand the very basis of the firearms that they said that they were banning. How absurd is that you have such disconnect between the consequences of what I would suggest is a massive overreach of the executive branch and targeting something, and then they torque it up with their rhetoric about somehow how they're taking action on crime. Madam Speaker, it is shameful, the record of that government. And then that brings it very, very neatly, and unlike what the members opposite suggest, where this somehow doesn't have relevance to the debate today, which is absurd, and again, more of their torqued political rhetoric, at a time when they seem to be bent on calling an election in the midst of a pandemic, which I would note, just as a little bit of an aside, there's a Supreme Court challenge in Newfoundland that's been launched today by an opposition party because of an election there that many would suggest, and certainly this lawsuit suggests, does not have the confidence of the people. And it was a Liberal majority. And yet this Prime Minister and this government seem bent on stealing power at any cost. Madam Speaker, the third aspect of this bill is that it takes the serious criminal offenses, and specifically in the first part of my speech, as I mentioned, I want to talk about the firearms side of things. The fact that they are lessening penalties on serious firearms offenses. Madam Speaker, the Liberals introduced Bill C-21, banning toy guns, literally. Now, they said that was fake news. Yet, the reality is, we've learned, is that bad legislation creates bad outcomes and doesn't do what they say that they are trying to accomplish. And then in the same week, they introduced Bill C-22. Only a few days later, Madam Speaker, on Tuesday, I think it was, they introduced a bill to punish law-abiding Canadians for simply living their lives, in many cases, using something that is a tool in many parts of our country. I come from a rural constituency, Madam Speaker, where a firearm is a tool like many other. Now, it can be used for a weapon, but so can a baseball bat, a kitchen knife, or a van. Yet that torqued up rhetoric based on blind ideology has labeled so many thousands, millions of Canadians to be somehow criminals. Yet on the same week, only a couple of days later on a Thursday, they introduced Bill C-22 eliminating penalties for serious firearms offenses. Madam Speaker, it is absurd that that's what they think they can get away with. Well, Madam Speaker, certainly my constituents see through that absurdity, and I hear from Canadians across the country, including constituents of quite a few members opposite, that are saying they're starting to see through the facade, that the political spin that government opposite is trying to bring on this, and how absolutely shameful it is in that regard. Now, Madam Speaker, that brings me to the second part of my speech, which addresses some of the other aspects of this bill, in the very troubling trend that I would suggest that it is setting. So Bill C-22 eliminates a number of those firearms offenses and the mandatory prison time: robbery with a firearm, discharging a firearm with intent to harm, and weapons trafficking. Well, Madam Speaker, those are the problems, not law-abiding firearms owners. The Liberals are proposing also in this bill that criminals could serve house arrest rather than jail time for a number of offenses, including sexual assault. Madam Speaker, I would suggest that in the midst of the conversation around whether sexual assault in the military, I listened to the testimony on the Bastrash report with sexual assault in the RCMP, and then just the revelation of how terribly pervasive that is within our society. Yet the Liberals, who talk tough about trying to their woke feminist prime minister, yet they are truly being soft and punishing victims at a time when victims deserve an advocate. Trafficking in persons for material benefit and kidnapping. Madam Speaker, again, at a time when we are trying to bring awareness to human trafficking, the fact that the Liberals are punishing victims, how absolutely absurd and shameful that is. And there's a series of other offenses that the sentences are being reduced, and I see that my time is quickly disappearing, but certainly it is very, very troubling, the trends that are being set, this soft-on-crime approach, ignoring victims. Meanwhile, we see, and especially in my large constituency in rural East Central Alberta, we have seen a massive growth in rural crime, serious offenses that have really affected the way of life of my constituents, affected the ability for Canadians to feel safe in their homes. It's affected so many aspects of the way in which we live. Now, the Liberals are going to suggest that somehow us evil Conservatives are wanting to punish people for not breaking the law. Well, that's just Liberal spin. And it's unfortunate that it's devolved to the point that it has, because it's actually taking away from the seriousness of what this debate should be. Because Conservatives, it's quite simple, Madam Speaker, are focused on ensuring that Canada's drug laws target individuals who prey on Canadians who are struggling with addictions through the trafficking and sale of drugs. Madam Speaker, those drug dealers, those gangs, they deserve, the victims of what is an opioid pandemic, and the member from Lakeland prior to me articulated very, very well how there is such challenges that we face in terms of drug use in this country. And this is not about punishing a victim, but this is about ensuring that those who are responsible for those abuses, the gangs, the drug dealers and whatnot, are punished. Conservatives believe, quite frankly, in fact, we've talked a lot about mental health. And there needs to be a clear plan on ensuring that there is restorative justice and a plan that actually addresses and helps victims. And that's the clear difference here. You have the hug-a-thug mentality from the Liberals on the other side, and you have Conservatives that want to stand up for victims And it is incredibly troubling, Madam Speaker, that Bill C-22 in the context of the bigger picture, but also the blatant hypocrisy that exists on the firearms debate. And Madam Speaker, I would just conclude by saying I cannot in good conscience support this, and my constituents have overwhelmingly told me the same, that this is a bad bill, and I certainly will not be supporting it going forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Great speech.
His hands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his remarks in the House here today. Before I had the privilege of representing the people in Kings Hants, I served as a lawyer, and I can certainly say that not all the factors of each case are the same. Every case is built different. Does he believe that it's his job here in Parliament to be able to tell, and he's in a better position, I should say, than the men and women that we appoint to judges to be able to decide the sentences of individuals who commit crimes? Does he think he's better placed here in the Parliament than someone that would hear the actual facts of the case?
A member for Battle River Crowfoot.
There you have it, Madam Speaker, where this spin and somehow suggesting that the Conservatives are simply wanting to target or prescript offences and whatnot. The reality couldn't be farther from the truth. Conservatives do believe that serious crime deserves serious time. And the vast majority of Canadians suggest the same. Now, I find it very ironic that the Liberals want to paint this as all being, the evil Harper era that brought in all of these things, when it's actually Pierre Elliott Trudeau. They're repealing some laws and whatnot that date back to the Prime Minister's own father. And I think that it speaks to, and to acknowledge the member, there has to be a proper balance that's found. And in practice right now, the Public Prosecution Service and the discretion of law enforcement, there is a great deal of flexibility. But when it comes to serious crimes, there has to be serious penalties for that in this country. Madam Speaker, victims deserve it.
And comments? The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
We've been working with the Firekeepers Council of Mushkegowuk to deal with the opioid crisis in downtown Timmins, which has caused devastation. So to have a mobile team working with the homeless, getting them off the streets, getting them the help they need. But that's only part of what we're facing with the devastating impacts of fentanyl, crystal meth in all our communities. The need to have treatment centers. We've been reaching out to the Liberals saying we need action. We need a commitment. We are losing people every day across this country, and in our communities we have had massive deaths because of fentanyl and the opioid crisis. I'd like to ask my honourable colleague about why he thinks it is that we're talking about many things in this House, but we're never hearing from the Liberal government on the crisis that we're seeing right on the ground in all our communities.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I agree. There is certainly, the pandemic has taken a lot of airtime regarding health issues, but at the same time there has been an epidemic of opioid deaths. In fact, in British Columbia, and forgive me, I don't have the most recent stats, but there were more opioid deaths than there were COVID at least a number of months ago. And I think that it is absolutely tragic that we're not taking this seriously. And part of the reason why I'm opposed to this bill in particular is because the government seems intent on lessening penalties for those who would be responsible, not the victims that are because of often mental health challenges and a series of other factors that would lead to addiction, but the people that are bringing these drugs, getting them onto our streets, smuggling them into our country, and the gang activity associated with that. And it's troubling that there's that issue is not taken more seriously. And then on the other side, I was proud that a Conservative bill, private member's bill, to deal with recidivism. And further, significant Conservative pressure to deal with mental health challenges, to ensure that we are addressing the full context here. But certainly victims, including victims of opiate addictions, need to be stood up for, and that's this bill fails miserably at that.
We have time for a brief question. Une brève question.
The honourable member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question. Yes, in fact, under the Conservatives, Harper's Conservatives, we saw the extent to which there was heightened criminalization. So I understand what is happening with this bill. My question is this, just with regard to opioids. You're talking about victims, but there are also individuals who take them and who should be protected. Do you agree with the decriminalization of possession of these substances, such as opioids? Please speak directly to the chair and not to the member.
Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And the simple answer is no, I do not agree in the decriminalization of drugs. However, it is a misconception that this bill somehow is fixing the problem of individuals that would be charged with simple possession. That's not what this bill addresses. This addresses the serious offenses of those who are trafficking, smuggling, and involved in the gang activity that lead to these victims on our streets. We have to have a plan to address opiate addiction in this country.
Okay. Resuming debate, the honourable member for King's Hands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'll be splitting my time this morning with my honourable colleague from Humber River, Black Creek. And Madam Speaker, this is the first time that I've had the chance to speak in the House since the passing of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the Royal Consort. And I just want to go on record, obviously recognizing his significant achievement to public life in the Commonwealth. And certainly I know other parliamentarians have spoken to this as well, but I want to add my voice to that. Ultimately, Madam Speaker, we're here today to talk about Bill C-22, which is about repealing mandatory minimum sentences that had been established under the previous Harper government. And for those Canadians that are listening in today on this debate, in case this is the first time you're listening, and so you can understand the intent of the legislation, essentially there's three elements to underpinning what this legislation is about. It's about repealing mandatory minimum penalties for certain offenses. It's about allowing the judiciary to use greater extent or greater discretion in terms of conditional sentence orders. And it's also requiring police and prosecutors to examine whether or not it's appropriate to treat certain simple possession, drug possession, as more of a health issue as opposed to a justice issue. So those are the three underpinnings of what we're talking about here today. And Madam Speaker, I'm a member of Parliament in King's Hands. I have 3 Indigenous communities. I often say that.
Sorry, I have a point of order. The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And just a point for my friend, as I'm sure he wouldn't want to deliberately mislead this House. Many of the changes that are being made to this bill are not Harper changes. They date back to Pierre Elliott.
Remind the honourable member that